guys, it's Kictor. I just had the opportunity of a lifetime. I got to interview some of the amazing people that have worked on our favorite Danmei books. I just had a 2-hour chat with Pengi, Rae, Yu, Yoon, Louise, Yuka, Ami, and Mimi. These incredibly talented people have all played a big role in translating and editing our favorite Danmei novels in English. Some titles include Heaven Official's Blessing, The Grand Master of Demonic Cultivation, Scum Villain's Self-Saving System, The Husky and His White Cat Shizun, Guardian, Stars of Chaos, The Disabled Tyrant's Beloved Pet Fish, and many more. I polled you guys for questions and they gave you answers. So let's jump right in. For those fluent in Chinese and English, how does it feel reading the original novel versus the one that you've translated?
I can speak for Louise's answer here, but she said that it's like sort of different because they're very inherently different languages, and the vibes are never going to match 100% even if you get the meaning across. And she said it's sort of like painting a photograph where you get the same overall image, but there's always going to be differences in the details just due to the nature of the medium. I thought was a very poetic answer.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I'll give Mimi's answer here, and that she hopes that she just got the original meaning across. She rarely ever reads Danmei in English, other than to check out the translation quality. But when it comes to her own, she hopes to do the author's work justice.
That I could just imagine that'd be like a surreal experience. What is everybody's favorite work you have worked on and why?
So TGCF is always going to hold a special place in my heart. It was the first professional Danmei that I ever worked on and my first Danmei ever. So
it's the one that got me into fan translating in the first place, and that necessarily requires a lot of love to, get started. And that's Sayet Run Wild.
Awesome. I'm excited to read that one.
I'm excited for it to come out.
As for Mimi's answer, she says that she loves everything that she's worked on for different reasons, but Disabled Tyrant's Beloved Pet Fish was definitely the funniest. And she had a lot of fun translating it because it was so unserious most of the time.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Louise and I had a similar answer where we love all our children equally, but I think each of them like have their own special points. Like Louise said Tianbao is a lot of fun because of all the clownery, which I also agree with. And she said that Chaperon special since it's our first, and I think I can relate since Scum Villain was also like my first ever translation project and then the first to be published, so it also has a special place in my heart.
Yeah, I think Disabled Tyrants' like unexpected popularity has made it quite special. I think when we were translating it, when we were working on it, we weren't like, yeah, this is gonna be huge. But like, I'll be at cons and people will be like, oh, it's the fish book.
It's because everyone knows it as the I will now proceed to pleasure myself with this fish meme. And also Mpreg.
Wait, I have to make it clear. My favorite is Guardian, though it's not Disabled Tyrant. Clarification.
Just for the record.
My best child is still Guardian and always will be.
What was the most complicated book you've worked on?
Guardian. Even though I'm like actively working on QJJ right now, which is complicated in its own way. I would say it's objectively more complicated in the plot and the lore and the political stuff, but it's a lot more linear and a lot more logical in the way that Guardian is not. But Guardian is just like, there's a lot of circling back and Priest going like, you thought you figured that out, but guess what? That was all a trick. And there's so much Chinese mythology in there that as we're all on the team, we're all familiar with that, but it's just slightly off. It's it's a creation story, but not. And then it's like
AU of the creation story.
It's Priest's interpretation.
The characters in the creation story that clearly all have their own Baidu pages or whatever that you can go do research on. Miss Priest has decided these two guys, they're the same guy. Which one am I talking about? Good luck.
But to be fair, it's not Chris just being like creative. It's because Chinese mythology as a whole, it's not completely clear. It's over the years, it became a mix of different lore from different cultures and religions. So even if you were to go on Baidu, it's like this page says one thing, and the other source says another.
They'll have,
and I think Priest probably just combined some of them, and was like, "Yeah, this makes the most sense."
That's why we had to make that disclaimer at the end. That's like, this is how we took it, but there are other options.
Right.
Good luck.
A real professional chef doesn't need to follow the recipe to the letter. She throws her own ingredients in there. She puts her own spin on it.
Yeah, it's just scrambling to find her ingredients is very hard.
Yeah. Oh, I would also say shop along as a priest work, but less because of the like lore and backstory and more because of the prose itself, because I think Priest loves her puns and wordplays, which is like always very tricky to work through because like it's not going to automatically work in English if you just translate the literal meaning. So you have to do a lot of like tweaking and stitching to make something that like gets the humor across.
Right.
And I'll also put in Louise's answer. Louise said it was actually Tianbao for her, since it's like fantasy, but also a very specific historical time period. So you need to sort of reconcile what's actual history and what's fiction. And then there's also a lot of Fei Tian likes to quote poetry at us, which is fun to read, but then you have to translate all the poetry because you can't just like steal other people's copyrighted translations, and a lot of them like don't have published translations in the first place. So.
Oh yeah. Is it awkward having to work on smut scenes in a professional environment?
Nah.
Oh my god, when we were translating the Dao Zu Shi, the incense burner extra, like just all of the comments between us for being like, it's still going. It's like, It's not awkward really at that point, because at that point you're usually pretty comfortable with the people you're working with, and you're mostly just making jokes.
Yeah.
About,
I'd say,
swords going up asses, for example.
Yeah, I'd say like translating the smut is awkward sometimes, but actually like working with the editors is more funny. Because I think I remember this one time we were like talking about this one like Scum Villain sex scene, and Mo Xiang had said that the tip of Lovinka's dick was the size of a ball, and Emma was like, "What kind of ball?" And I was like, "I don't know."
That's the kind of question that editors like to ask. Like, what kind of ball? What size is the ball?
No, but have you guys had the even more cursed one of where the head of the dick is the size of a baby's fist? Which, like, why did you bring an infant into this? Like, that's definitely what I needed in a sex scene. Thank you.
Isn't there also a character in Scum Villain where they're like, he weighed 6 balls? And it's like, what ball? Like,
well, that's the joke.
The same ball that's the size of Bingha's dick, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of do want to talk about like the actual translation of smut, because I don't know if people know this, or at least this is my takeaway, but I think the kind of hard thing about translating sex scenes is that in Chinese, the sex scenes are often from the point of view of the top. And then like in English, I feel like a lot of this like smut that I'm reading is from the point of view of the bottom. So it's like really difficult to like make it seem natural almost. Like I don't know how to explain it, but like the references that I would go to look at to help me translate these scenes is like, wait, I can't use these words because it's from the opposite point of view.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And I suppose like just as if you're translating something, you could translate a line maybe like bluntly, but you'd still want to add like the nuance of like, this is a sexy thing happening and not just like a physical act.
I was gonna say wetness. and moist
Oh,
and
That's
damp.
what I was going to say. That's exactly.
And the association with water in general.
Oh yeah.
That is it's inherently, like, when you read it in Chinese, you read it as sexy. That's just the way it is. But when you translate it into English doesn't like that. It doesn't like wet things.
English doesn't appreciate the omega slick that is spontaneously generated in these.
I think
English?
there's just very different adjectives that have like different connotations, and when you're translating a sex scene, you don't want to take the reader out of the immersion. Like, wait, like, what is this adjective doing here? Like, how is this wet? Or like, you don't want them asking questions.
Right,
So I feel like
exactly.
sometimes, yeah, actually, like, sources, like looking at how other people write normal sex scenes and like novels that are written in English is actually super helpful, even just for like pulling vocabulary.
Yeah.
But like you guys said, sometimes you can't find the right words for like the concept that's trying to be described.
Also, for example, like I will go read stuff because I'm like, oh, I don't know how to translate this, and I just noticed that in the English sex scene, there's a lot of like, oh, the bottom feels good, like this feels like he feels full. This is like pleasurable to him, like words like that, and then the Chinese will be like, thrust, more thrusting.
You just fucking jammed it in there.
Like, what do I do with this? How do I convert thrusting 100 times into, yes, it feels good?
So Mimi is saying in chat, she can only use the word thrust so many times without it sounding weird. Yeah.
Oh,
and Louise said the biggest struggle is not enough sexy words in English for cock.
I would say that
so many words you can use in Chinese for cock that don't sound weird. But then
I think in English you have like two. You only have
Jade
two.
pillar.
Bestial stem.
God. Mimi in chat also came up with a good point about how you also have to deal with author-specific quirks with sex scenes. Like, sometimes the scene just isn't sexy to begin with, and do you keep it not sexy and be accused of, you made this not sexy, you're a bad translator or a bad editor, when it's no, it's meant to be bad.
Right. I can understand audiences believing that it was the translation that made it unsexy when you're like, no, the original was like this. It's not intended. This one was not meant to be sexy, I guess.
What, you don't like having wine poured into your ass?
Oh my god.
I think it was supposed to be sexual.
I just read Luis's comment in the chat saying bestial stem is a no-go in English.
A case file? He called his dick a niagen, which is like an evil root.
well, I was gonna bring up there. I feel like meat bun does have a lot of like plant words, like you're sowing the land with and the root, and like
there is one really like memorable one where she was like describing a heterosexual couple. I don't know if that's the one you're thinking of, Victor.
Yeah.
She was describing like roots going into like the moist ground, and I was just like, what? This is too much. And everything was being described as wet. It's like exactly what Ami was saying earlier. Just like all the like wet adjectives.
It's the ground, it's the fertile and wet ground.
It makes sense. It's just not used in English, unfortunately. So if you are working on a danmei that you truly love, does it still feel like work? Or does the process of working on a danmei take away your enjoyment from it?
It's work, but it's for a divine cause. So,
right after the previous discussion, this sounds really cursed.
It's fulfilling. It's hard and moist and bestial stems, but it's...
I feel like the smut scenes definitely feel like work. Like, ironically, that is the part that feels most like work.
It's just because they're the most difficult to try and adapt into sexy in English.
I think it feels like work because we have deadlines.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it only feels like work when we're close to a deadline. For me, I try to take on books that I would like to read more than once, and that's kind of a way that I'm trying to trick myself into rereading it, because otherwise I keep saying I'm gonna reread this, but I never really have time to reread it. But translating is like a way to reread it, really close read it too.
Right.
When it's really enjoyable is when like you just kind of, it's an excuse to spend more time with the characters and with the story and with the text. So I feel like, yeah, the ideal case is like the translation doesn't feel like work because it's just like something that you really enjoy spending time with. But yes, the time crunch towards the end is when it starts to feel more like the deadline is looming.
Right.
Mimi says that she just never felt like working on Danmei's work. It's more of a break, especially since she is in medical school, which takes up 80% of her time, leaving the other 20% for Danmei and other hobbies. So
Damn.
it's definitely more enjoyable than that. And she's also never translated anything that she didn't like.
How did you come to work in this industry? And do you have any advice for anyone who may want to break into the industry as an editor or translator?
Complicated question, because Danmei in English as an industry is very new. As for coming to work in this industry, I mean, pretty much all of us got pulled in because of fan translations.
For myself and Louise, I was also like pulled in by the first round of 7 Sports because they reached out to me because I was working on fan translation. For people who want to break into the industry, I guess it's the same thing about like how a lot of us sort of like stumbled into this area. But Louise does say like it's good to have an easily accessible body of work so that people who are looking for translators can sort of like find you and like evaluate your level of skill, and also to read widely and stay humble and remember that no one's too good for feedback, which I think is a big thing, because I think you have to be open to like having your work like very heavily edited, and like lots of people are going to look at it, and I think that's ultimately made me a lot better at my craft. Like there are ways we can take this like writing and make sure it both preserves the meaning and it like reads a lot better as a work in English on its own right. And I think I've been able to like get a lot better than I would have if I was just doing fan translation all the way through.
There are definitely some tough conversations that need to happen with editing, and being able to handle those gracefully will basically make or break whether you can be a professional. Not to be too dramatic, but yeah.
It's always good to have like an extra set of eyes on it, because especially when you're translating and as like a bilingual person, it's like you get caught in like the Chinese sort of way of maybe expressing things or like saying things. And then if you have someone who's not in that look over it, then it's like, oh, this doesn't sound natural in English, or like this sounds really strange. And then they can fix that, or like, you know, discussion and whatever.
I definitely have improved a lot just based on editors' feedback. A good editor giving constructive feedback will really advance you a lot more than if you were just doing it by yourself. But I think for anybody who wants to try their hand at translating, even like fan translations, I would say to just start doing it, because a lot of people, sometimes people would look at a published work and they might have comments, they might have their own opinions, but you really don't know what it feels like or know what it's like to do it until you start doing it. Some people might think they have a very good grasp of the language, or they don't feel like they're very good at it. But until you start doing it, you just don't know.
Right.
Also, we're constantly learning new stuff all the time, especially from the editor's feedback. And it's just good to keep your mind open and just keep reading. Like seriously, keep reading. Because if we if we keep just working on the translations and not read anything in the target language, it's really easy to get lost, like Mimi said, in the Chinese syntax of the sentences. And then it starts, your quality starts going down.
In my experience, the level of the source language level doesn't necessarily have to do with how effective you'll be as a translator. So even if you're like extremely fluent, like a native speaker of Chinese, I think to get good at translating, you really have to practice like moving your thoughts from Chinese into English, or like moving text from Chinese into English. And I think also something that was super helpful for me was like reading more books that are written natively in English and trying to piece together like how the prose is put together in English, but also at the same time reading more in Chinese. So I had more of a sense of just like, I mean, that is like general knowledge you should have, but specifically for Danmei, like genre conventions and kind of like audience expectations. And there's a lot of tropes, I think, that just if the more you read, then the more familiar you'll be with them. And so I think like that is kind of necessary for the specific type of literature or whatever that you want to translate, just to make sure you're not like leading the audience astray or like placing too much emphasis on something that's actually like very common to that type of novel or something like that. So like, yeah, you have to practice, but you also need to be aware of kind of like how the work fits into the other works that are like part of its cohort.
Yeah.
If Seven Seas is like, or any translation company is like looking for translators, I come from a creative background, so it's like you need a portfolio to present. Like, it's not like I interview you and you go, yeah, I'm a good translator. Like, they're going to hire you. You have to present them with your work. It doesn't need to be like a full novel or like anything really elaborate. You could take like chunks of a chapter or like one chapter and translate it. Just like have something. You need a portfolio of work for people to believe your skills.
To build off of that, if you're coming from like a fan translator background, it's very common to have like a translator and then like an editor to go over it, right? For me, when I was doing like other stuff, if someone was like, hey, what do you think about this person's translations? I'd be like, well, I don't really know, because if an editor looked over it, I don't know how much, or I don't know what the original translation looked like and how much the editor had like fixed. So I think for maybe like portfolio purposes, it'd be good to have one where it was like you worked on it as like the fan translator alone, and not have it go through someone else. I know it sounds better to have it go through someone else, and like for posting reasons, like it's probably good to do that, but yeah, because otherwise I don't know where the actual skill level is. And it's like, well, did you choose this word? Or did you have to go through a lot of discussion with this other person to choose this word? Because it's easier for editors as well if the base translation is, you know, decent. And yeah.
How do you approach translating wordplay or puns that have no direct equivalent in English?
Cry.
Definitely cry.
A lot of crying.
I mean, okay, Louise says that rule number 1 is you want to avoid footnoting and explaining the joke at all costs, because if you have to explain the joke, it's no longer funny. Like, this is huge. And then Louise also says that I try to keep in mind the broader context, like what sort of effect this is going to have on the rest of the narrative, like the text surrounding it, and what actually makes it funny. So if the pun doesn't work when you directly translate it, and it often doesn't, sometimes we do actually switch it out for an English joke that has like a similar effect. Oh yeah, this is like, she put in an example from Chapelang where the original line was like, oh god, this is hard to explain, but
that's why you adapted it instead, because it's hard to explain.
You want me to explain? So the original text, it basically has a character mistaking an idiom, but the thing is the Chinese idiom, which is basically a way to describe someone who's working very hard at studying, if you translate that directly, it makes like no sense in English because there is no cultural context for the readers to draw on. And so for the translation, what we ended up doing is we just picked an English expression, an English idiom that you use for people who are studying very hard, and then make like basically mess with that expression first before that character is corrected.
Right.
So I think we went with my dage is really, what's the word? Slamming the books hard. And then the other character says it's hitting the books hard. And so in that case, like, it's a different idiom, but the humor still hits the way it would in the original Chinese text.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's the best way to get humor across without like totally ruining it with just a footnote, I suppose. I never thought about that. Like, if you just wrote the Chinese part and everyone's like, that doesn't make sense, then you read the footnote, you're like, oh, and you're like, okay, I'm not involved in the scene at all anymore because of that.
Because I think the issue with footnoting and explaining jokes is that it's antithetical to the original text. Because if you're reading the text in Chinese, you would never have to be like, can you explain this to me? I don't understand the joke. Right. So that's kind of that's my position on.
There is also a lot cultural context in a lot of jokes and a lot of wordplay that even with a really detailed footnote, you might not be able to get it across. It really, some things only come with just many years of experience of being like steeped into the culture. And in those cases, it's just better to localize it into something that the English readers would recognize immediately and just move on, because it's most of the time it's not that serious. It's a joke. Just make sure that people laugh and move on.
With Guardian, while I was clean reading the last volume, I came upon a joke that just didn't make sense, not because of the wordplay, but because of the reference. It's when they're trying to look for that kidnapped schoolgirl, and he's just like, oh, she's probably long gone right now and is already being sold on the market. We should look for her at Carrefour.
Oh, the wholesale one.
Yeah, and in my notes, I mentioned just like, this isn't going to make sense to North American readers because Carrefour doesn't have a North American presence. So I suggested changing it to something else. But I noticed that in the final volume, it got changed to Walmart.
We have an example from Husky that it's like the rare example that I feel like we had a huge headache trying to figure out how to adapt it. But then the end result, I feel like, actually worked. So it's from volume 6. There's a character called Ma Yun, or Jack Ma.
This part was so funny to read, by the way.
I was actually not sure how many English readers would know like who Jack Ma is. Yeah, I feel like any Chinese reader would know like who Jack Ma is and like what the joke is. And his site is called Taobao Zhuang, or like Taobao Estate, which is like the name of one of his companies. But anyway, Jack Ma is this Chinese entrepreneur who's the head of like Alibaba. He's basically like, I don't know, Chinese like Jeff Bezos or something. And then Mi Ban like makes a character that's like clearly a caricature of him and has like the same name or different characters. But when he's introduced, the paragraph in Chinese is like explaining how he has this like network of delivery outposts and all these like different transportation kind of like businesses. And then it says he has this nickname because of that. That's 接客马, which like literally in Chinese is like he like is picking up like all the guests from different places. But then we were like, and it sounds like Jack Ma, but we were really hitting our heads against the table trying to figure out how to get it to work in English, because Jack doesn't mean like picking people up in English. But we ended up saying that he dealt in many different areas of transportation, basically. So then people called him a jack of all trades, or for short, Jack Ma. So like we needed to figure out a way to incorporate Jack into it without like directly translating it from Chinese. But yeah, sometimes it's like just this weird puzzle. Like you just have nothing, you have like no ideas, and then something just like comes out of the blue and you're like, okay, like this can work. But I feel like until you figure out like randomly, like this is the thing that could work, it's like to be interesting.
Yeah.
A source of crying.
That is so interesting. I love hearing stories like that about like what, even just like what it meant in Chinese and how that wouldn't make sense in English and finding the equivalent. Like that's so cool. And that joke was so funny. Like I died laughing. I sent that to so many people. Like I sent that to so many friends that aren't even in Danmei. I'm like, Jack Ma's in my book.
Oh my god, I'm so glad it was appreciated. This is like the best validation.
Yeah, I know, it was so good.
I think when it comes to translating puns, like kind of reiterating what other people have said, you just have to find the one connection from the Chinese to the English, whether it be the meaning or like by meaning I mean like you find a similar idiom that means the same thing, but it's not the same joke, or you find the one thing in the joke that you keep, and then you somehow formulate the English around it. So like in Ray's example, it's Jack. There was like one for Disabled Tyrant that I can remember where it was like a pack of alpacas ran through his head, but in Chinese, alpaca is 草泥马, which is like fuck.
Oh my god, I've had to deal with that too.
Yeah, it's like how people swear, and I was thinking, I don't think we use this, but I was thinking like, you know how there's that animal whose French name is fuck? I was like, oh, like a pack of like fucks swam across your head. I don't think we went with it, but it's like something like that. You just have to find the one connection and then build off of it.
Right. That's so interesting. That's really cool. I would love to hear just a whole video just talking about those types of like idioms and wordplay that you had to come up with, because that's so impressive.
Yeah, and then sometimes you have to decide whether or not all of this effort is worth this joke.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier, like if it's like a really inconsequential joke that like when you're reading it, it's just like barely even pay attention to it, then it might be the wiser choice to localize it so that it fades into the background more.
Right.
In the reading experience. So there's also that choice that you have to make.
Yeah. For novels that were originally published online with author's notes on many of the chapters, do you think that it changes the reader's experience to be missing those in a published version, regardless of the language?
I own TGCF in 7 different languages, and not a single one of them has included author notes. It's just not something that's done in published works, and it's not included in the manuscripts that were given. Those manuscripts are put together by the authors themselves, and it means that they don't want them in there, or they don't consider them important enough to include.
As a fan that originally read the source with the author's notes, regardless of it being like professional or not to include them, do you like mourn them? Like, do you wish it was something that was included?
I mean, they're fun. Like, some of them are like have a lot of funny jokes in them. Some of them they have extra information in them that doesn't included. There are several examples of that in TGCF in specific. One of the author notes was MXTX clarifying that Hua Cheng was only pretending to be passed out when the CPR scene happened, and that did not come across in the text itself, so that was basically just lost in adaptation, essentially. I mourn their loss, but also, like, that's just kind of what happens. Like, serialization is very different from publication, especially online serialization, so it's kind of like, I don't know, watching a Twitch stream live instead of a curated compilation later.
Yeah. It's like you gotta be there for the original if you want absolutely everything, but it's understandable why all of that can't be included.
The works as they, like, on its own, they're able to stand on their own. They're a full, coherent story, even without these author's notes. The author's notes are interactions with the readers as they're serializing the novel. Mm-hmm. So if a new reader comes in and they don't get that and they don't know what they're missing, then that's still fine. That's still a good experience.
I think there's a lot of Meat Bun's notes. There's a lot of her explaining what happens. And also a lot of her, like, for Remnants of Filth, for example, there's notes where she, like, spoils, like, all the big reveals that are in Husky and his White Hat Shizun. And then even in her notes for Husky, there's ones that, like, I feel like are potentially could be considered spoilers for, like, later chapters. It's just, like, it would not really be appropriate to include spoilers, like, in a published book before people get to it.
Yeah, one of MXTX's author notes in TGCF in, like, the 10th chapter just flat out spoils that Hua Cheng's ring, the ring that Hua Cheng gave him is his ashes. So
Interesting. I kind of love the way that you put it, that it's like being there for the live stream. It's like if you're there for the live stream, you get the extra context, you get the extra tidbits, but then once it's going to be professional, like obviously those won't be included.
Yeah, that's such a good
I love it. I love, thank you. I love being praised for my metaphors.
Louise also said in the chat that in the Remnants of Filth and Case File mini theaters, for example, she'll have like basically characters. It's just like an AU. It's like an alternate universe in the notes where she just has like all of her characters in there like partying and interacting with each other. And if you haven't read them, then you would just be like, what the heck is going on? So yeah, super cute bonus, but like kind of strange to include in a published book.
I think sometimes author's notes are almost like a parasocial kind of thing where readers get to feel closer to the author like during serialization, and then like they'll come back for more. It's just different when you're reading it in a book. Like you're not reading one chapter a day anymore. You're doing like maybe a whole volume in a sitting or like a couple volumes in a sitting. So I don't think it hits the same sometimes.
That makes sense. Like the medium in which you actually experience the book. Like if you are only able to read one chapter a day, getting a little funny tidbit at the end as like a reward makes sense. Okay, so this question is, are there any people that are not native Chinese/Mandarin speakers? If yes, how long did it take you to learn Chinese?
I'm the only one who's not a native speaker, and I am still learning. So the answer is, how long did it take me to learn? Still going.
I think like when it comes to Chinese to English translation, my fluency in English can be higher than my fluency in Chinese, which is why I can't do English to Chinese translation.
Interesting.
I don't think that will work out for me.
Same. Because you will need to be able to have that vocabulary in Chinese that you can not only recognize, but just able to conjure from your mind. And I think, I can't do that.
Yeah, and I guess like one thing Louise wanted to comment is that like, she's also a native Chinese speaker, but did want to say that like language learning and maintenance is an endless process. So you really have to use it or lose it. I think like as we were discussing, like, actively translating can help a lot, even if you're, starting out as like a fluent speaker who can already talk to people in Chinese.
Can you share a funny or memorable story from your experience translating or editing novels?
I have one I want to talk about. So this was from way back when we were still like I was still working on Scum Villain with Fallacy as a fan translation. So I think Fallacy started doing that like late 2019, early 2020-ish, and then I joined in. But this was in March 2020 when a certain event was sweeping through North America, and we all got kicked off campus abruptly in the middle of March, and I was like quarantined in my parents' basement, and I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna be stuck here for 2 weeks. I'm bored. Maybe I'll do a little bit of translation. Let me check on like what's coming up in Scum Villain that we're trying to work on. And I find out that it's the Jinlan City Plague arc. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I really like sitting in my parents' basement, like just stuck there for 2 weeks after everyone got like kicked off during COVID. And I'm like, I think God is laughing at me right now. Like I'm not religious, but still. So that was a time. And then Louise also wants to say that this is like more of a translation adjacent thing, but she was consulting her mom about some things for Tianbao with like cultural references and just accidentally turned her into a huge Fei Tian fan. And like her mom like read the book within 2 weeks and then said like, you have to do this, you have to do this.
That's incredible.
So this was last year, but I was translating like a smut scene in class. This was not a classmate looking over to my screen. This was the lecturing professor standing over me reading my screen.
Oh.
And I didn't know because apparently he was there for a few minutes, but I was like focused. And then like when he left, my table mates were like, hey, he was like standing like right behind you. And I was like, oh. But I'm pretty sure he saw, it wasn't like full on smut. It was just like pretty clear that it was like a little bit sus. And so that was kind of fun, but pay attention in class, kids.
Louise also wants to add that like her mom was like, just so you know, there are gay sex scenes in Tianbao that you might struggle to translate because you feel embarrassed. Because she was like thinking about all the porn already translated. Like, thank you, mom. I'll keep that in mind.
Oh, mother.
Oh my gosh. is there a specific book where you think your translation made a major impact on how Western audiences perceive the characters or plot?
I think like one thing I noticed when I was looking at reviews for Chapeau is that like a lot of people commented on how funny it was. And I'm like, great, this is exactly what I wanted. People need to know how funny Priest is. Because I think like the fandom perception of her is like she does a lot of like very involved plotty novels, but her prose is like hilarious, and I want to make sure that the fans like actually know that. And it was like really it was really nice to know that it was coming across with the work we did on it.
I think that that really came across in Guardian as well, as a compliment to Guardian's translations team. Yes. Made it come across very well how much of a fucking whore Shaolin Yunan is.
Okay, great. Excellent. We did our job. That was the only job that we had.
That information needs to be evident to make you understand why he needs to be dragged into a cave by his hair and screwed into submission.
Do you know if the Chinese fandom has any popular opinions about the English versions of Danmei books?
Oh my god, I'm gonna learn English!
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people posting on Weibo about them doing English study from these books.
They were using like Chapeau for English reading practice, and I was like, oh.
They've been doing that from the very start. People were doing it with your Scum Villain translation and our TGCF and Modao.
That's so cool.
I'm friends with a couple like Chinese Danmei fans, and their overall opinion is just, how are these girls getting so much better food than we are, because there's no illustrations at all in the any of the Chinese versions, and if there's additional art, they're not allowed to show as much as a lot of the illustrations, especially for Erha, do.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
They're very jealous.
the more lewd ones. And I see a lot of comments who are just they're excited about more covers to collect.
Oh yeah.
Regarding the lewd illustrations, for TGCF Volume 8, we specifically asked Zelda, just like, go as lewd as you want in these illustrations whenever you can, because TGCF has no explicit sex, so you need to give them something.
How are the scenes that get pictures decided?
Basically, what happens is the people who are working on the translation write up a list with TGCF in specific. We had many, many more suggestions than would have been possible to illustrate in one volume, and did little summaries with each one and marked ones which we highly recommend to be included as very important or very plot relevant, and then the illustrator will review that.
What is your decision process when encountering a phrase that has nuance or ambiguity that might change the meaning of the scene?
I feel like this touches on another issue, which is like censorship in translation, which is that sometimes like in the original story, there's like problematic topics that I think in Chinese culture, it's not as problematic as it is perceived here. So it seems wrong to translate it in the exact same tone as how it's presented in the Chinese. Like, it feels like you're not giving it enough gravity, or like, this is just wrong, like we can't say this. Like, there's a certain degree, I'm sure, to where we're like, let's not, make drama out of nothing. But there's like a sort of push and pull between like, do I want to basically censor the author or like clean up this text because this thing that the author is saying is problematic? Or do I stay faithful to what the author is saying, even though like perhaps that's not their intention? Like, for example, like a really mild example is that like the word for autism in Chinese is like very broadly used for not autism purposes.
Right.
And so I think if you translated it directly as autism, it's gonna like make a lot of people angry. So it's kind of, you kind of like have to decide, do I do that, or do I sort of like replace that word? What they usually mean is like introvertedness. So it's like you have to make that decision. And then this applies to like other more serious topics.
Yeah, like the nuance and almost like political correctness of English, and how that would be censoring an original take that didn't have to deal with the political correctness because maybe that didn't even exist in that culture. That's very interesting.
I would say it's also because English is extremely specific. So when you have a word like, let's just take the autism, for example, that's a medical term, but it's not necessarily that in Chinese. In Chinese, the word is more descriptive. It's like literally it's self-closing, self-shutting. So when authors, and when people use that in daily language, they're not necessarily talking about the medical term that, is the same thing. It happens to be the same word.
Right.
They could just be describing something. And that applies to other stuff as well. There's just, and when you translate into English, you're required to be very specific about what you're talking about.
Right. No, that makes sense. I can understand how that could be very difficult. Okay. How does it feel being directly responsible for the accessibility of books to millions of people in English?
Really scary. I actually never think about it.
Yeah, I just don't. Sometimes I'll tell my friends, like, hey, you can find my name if you go to a Barnes & Noble, which is, like, kind of fun to say. But at the same time, I don't think I'm really comprehending how popular these novels are. So I'm just like, yeah, I'm doing my work. I turn my stuff in and it gets printed, and that's it.
Wow.
But it's the authors who are doing all the writing.
Yeah.
And we're just responsible for trying to be as faithful to the author's vision as possible. And then, like, obviously making these types of changes that we've been talking about to try to make sure that the English language readers can get, like, a similar experience to the Chinese language readers. But, like, we're just kind of a conduit for the author's vision to go through. So it is a lot of responsibility, but at the same time, like, our role is much smaller than the authors.
Yeah, because
I agree with that statement. I think it's mostly the author's hard work and skill and etc. is what made them famous, not us.
I think for me specifically, like, that doesn't cross my mind at all, because, like, I'm not doing anything different from when I was just translating Guardian on Google Docs. But yeah, like, me personally, I'm not, like, actually doing anything different. So I don't feel like I'm responsible or anything. I like that I'm part of the process, though. Like, I like that I'm helping to bring these books to English. But I don't think, like, it's like me doing something, if that makes sense.
I will say that your hard work is very important, and you should feel proud. And I know that I can't force you to feel proud, but
it's funny because I feel like you all had such, like, humble answers, but it's also kind of coming from the perspective of, like, oh, well, like, there's also, like, a publisher that's, like, making it accessible. But, like, it's not the publishers, it's you guys. If it wasn't the talent and the work that comes from literally translating it into a completely different language, like, someone like me would never be able to have accessibility to any of these characters or these stories that I love so much. Like, that's just something I might not have even know existed if it wasn't for translations. And that means, like, fan translations too. Like, I'm looking at that question even from just, like, a fan translation kind of way. Like, even if it was just an excerpt posted on Twitter, like, that has the ability to change, like, lives. Like, it literally changed my life. Like, I just think it's so special. It's such an incredible thing to make something that completely existed in another country accessible to the country I live in. Like, that's just the coolest thing ever to me.
yeah, I think it's because maybe we all grew up, like, bilingual and stuff. Like, it's hard to think of it as a skill for me, at least. I'm just like, yeah, I know
that's
Chinese.
just what we do.
Yeah, it's just what we do. And then, yeah, I think it's important for us to, or for me, sorry, to recognize and still keep in mind that it's the authors who, like, we're just trying to bring it to a wider audience. And, you know, they did all the brains. It went popular not because of, like, the translation went popular because the plot or the characters are very lovable or very, people can identify with them and stuff. So yeah, don't want to overstate my importance, not everything.
Well, you can understate it, but I will keep overstating it because I think it's just you guys put in so much work, and you're really I know that you guys are doing the best possible to make it faithful, and I just feel so grateful to be in a community and a fandom where there are people that like really, really care. That's like the coolest thing about like this whole interview and everything is like you can just tell you guys care. Like, do you know how rare that is? Like it's crazy to be able to just chat with you guys and see that.
I feel like we don't get to hear this kind of validation very often, so this is nice to hear.
We hear a lot
Oh
more.
my
So true.
No, it's really cool. It's just seriously, I think about that all the time about how I would not know any of this ever existed. Like, I've been trying to be professional, but I need you guys to know I'm like a huge fan of all of you guys so much. Like, it's crazy.
We love you.
To translate a novel, do you ever need to reference outside sources?
We have like one specific Discord channel for just reference links.
Okay.
Like there's so much research that goes into translating. I cannot emphasize this enough. When I translate, I have like my dictionary tab, my like blah 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 synonym tab, and then like 5 open Google tabs of research that I'm currently doing.
And this is not just
this is like with the knowledge I already have in my brain. Like, for example, when I translated Disabled Tyrant, I was like very happy because there was like ancient political like palace drama shit, and I am like, this is so up my alley. I was like, don't worry, I got this. I don't need to do any research. Famous last words.
Yeah, that doesn't just apply to historical works. Like, you're going to be researching pretty much on anything, even if it's the most basic modern day high school setting with no magic bullshit at all, or ancient political wartime bullshit.
Yeah, like for example, like do you think the Guardian police stuff came out of my brain? No, I have resource links for that too.
Because Chinese slang evolves very quickly, and some of the books are older, some of the books are newer. Like sometimes I think there was one like PUA, and it was like a little confusing because before, like the previous definition was like pickup artist, and it just didn't make sense in context. But it was like a newer slang where PUA is like gaslighting and et cetera, et cetera. So you have to do that type of research as well. And then like, because these terms also evolve, right? So older ones, you might have to refer back to an older definition, like, and you also have to figure out how like offensive or non-offensive it is, so you can pick the proper English word, right?
Right.
To translate modern Danmei, you basically have to be on the current Chinese internet. Yeah. You have to keep up with. You
must be terminally online at all times.
Yeah, it's not just like the most up-to-date youth slang. It's just the way that like people talk about things in general. And if you don't sometimes if you don't recognize that a certain word means something different, you would just skim over it and think that it means something else, and it doesn't even register if you don't have that cultural like knowledge bank already. Like sometimes some things that you can research, if you recognize that, oh, this is a word that I don't recognize, I can look up what it means. But for slangs and stuff, if you don't recognize it, you don't recognize it, and then it would get mistranslated.
A lot of these books were written 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So you have to be familiar with popular slang from 15 years ago.
Do you have any interesting facts about the translating or publishing process that you think fans would be surprised to hear?
How long the glossary is does not factor into like how long the volume is going to be. Like nobody is going like, oh my god, the glossary is long, let's cut out some from the volume. That does not happen. Like volume, where the volume cuts off is usually already decided, and then the glossary is just added on top of that. A lot of people in the past were saying like, oh my god, like it's so long, so they took out a couple chapters. If they took out the glossary, like this could be a whole volume shorter. I'm like, that's not true. I don't know who started that rumor, but please stop saying it. It's not true. This is like my one big gripe, because it just came out of nowhere, like this rumor.
Yeah.
For the glossary, like I don't know if people know, but we're the ones writing the glossary. Like it's not like 7Cs is like sticking stuff in there. Like after we're done translating the novel, we like spend a lot of time being like, should we include this? Should we include that? Do you think the readers will understand this, or should we like put in the glossary?
Right.
Or like there's a huge discussion about like if we should footnote it versus putting it in the glossary. And then I also spend like 4 million years sitting on my couch being like, Zhao Yunlan, how do I find the equivalent English words for this? You know, the translation is like we take the author's work and we translate it, but the glossary is like actually 100% from my brain. Or not my brain, but our brain.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. The glossaries are absolutely incredible. Like, that's just an amazing resource to have as just any reader, and like an English reader too.
I'm so glad you like it.
Yeah, I'm very glad that it's like validating that it's useful.
Oh yeah.
I feel like when I was writing them for TGCF and Modal, like I'm just like, is anyone going to actually be reading this? I'm not sure.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, I go through the glossaries, and my girlfriend Stitch, who's like, finds them so valuable because she makes all her like PowerPoints for the book reviews and stuff. She's constantly referring the glossary and always says like how grateful she is for them and how well made they are.
The other thing about the glossary is that like it literally is the accumulation of all the research that we did while translating this novel. It's like, I'm trying to make your life easier for you. Like the reason why I wanted to start translating was because I wanted to present this story to you and make you understand it. And with the glossary, I have a chance to not just make the text itself understandable, I have the chance to give you additional context. So I think we actually do put a lot of work into making the glossary like easy to understand and like not too complicated, etc., etc. So yeah, it's like kind of like the glossary is our baby.
Absolutely. I love that so much, having that literally like being presented the story and being able to understand it even deeper through the glossary is absolutely incredible.
And glossaries, I think I wouldn't call them like the definitions and stuff. I wouldn't say they're like exhaustive. They're just like they're just to get you to a point where you understand what's going on. So like some people are like, oh, this isn't exactly what it means, or that's not all what it means. And it's like, yes, but we can't give you a whole history lesson, right, in the glossary. And also, they're not footnotes, because in like published work, that's going to be a lot of footnotes, right? Like you don't want that in your book, and so like footnotes are half the page, and then the actual content is half the page. That's also kind of weird. So that's why, instead of footnotes like in fan translations, that's why they're in the back instead. And I hope people recognize that.
I'm sorry you guys have encountered some glossary haters, but I promise this is a house of glossary lovers.
So many glossary haters. Crazy.
Oh my gosh.
All of my homies love the glossary.
Yeah. We literally write the glossaries for you guys.
Yes.
Yeah, but we like 7Cs could totally just choose not to do the glossaries, and then we would have less work.
I gotta head out, by the way, but thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, Pengi, for setting this up. Like, your work is so valuable, and I just am such a fan of you and what you've done and how you've changed my life. So thank you so much, Pengi.
Thank you, Pengi.
Yeah, thank you for organizing.
Yeah, thank you for organizing.
One last thing I just wanted to say is that like I sent out a Google form to get all these questions from like my community, and every second question was basically just like, please tell them how much their work means to me, like how much it has deeply impacted my life, like how these stories have brought me so much joy, especially in like times of like so many messages of people that have had like hard times, and how these books have changed their lives. And it's because they are accessible in their language, and just the amount of work that you guys put into this. I can tell that you're also obviously like fans. Like, it's not just someone that knows how to translate is translating something. Like, it's people that also deeply care for these works. Like, you get it. Like we're the same. Like we both love the stories, and it's just so incredible to me that I see you guys as like freaking superheroes. Like it's something that I will never be able to do in my life is to translate something like that. And you've done it, and you're continuing to do it, and it is just so cool. So I hope that you know that there are so many people out there that view you as like fucking gods. Like, seriously.
Aw, thank you.
Aww.
That's so sweet.
It's true. So just thank you so much for your time to just hang out and chat like this. I would love to do more stuff together if that's something you'd be interested in the future.
This was fun.
This was so fun.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you guys so much for answering our questions and just for all of the work that you've done. Like it truly means the world to me that you guys have put all of this love into these books.
Hey, we love your videos too.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any kind words for these translators and editors, please leave them in the comments down below. This was such an amazing experience, and I couldn't have done it with the help of all you guys. So thank you so much for supporting this channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!